What's up, guys? I'm Shawnthebro, and we are here today for an episode of the fighting game tutorial. This time we are going to be dealing with functional spawn points, so you can actually move the spawn points around, which we kind of covered in a previous episode, but more importantly, we're going to be covering how to spawn a specific class instance. And what I mean by that is you see how we have two mannequins here as our fighters, and they spawned at their spawn points, which are right here. Well, we're going to have it so you can also choose to spawn the mutant instead. So the mutant, if you're not familiar with the series, is this guy right here. He doesn't have a lot of his animations in just because I simply haven't had the time to do it. But he's working just like the other characters. He does have some attack animations and things like that. But anyway, so yeah, we can actually determine which characters to spawn at the spawn points. And perhaps most importantly about all this is we're going to do it by data-driven means. So in the case I'm showing you here, I'm just, making the selection in the blueprint. But you can use the same method with one variable. I will show you it in today's code. And it will make it so if they select that character on our character select screen or something of that sort, then it'll just spawn that character, and also just for that player. I happen to have them both doing the same thing right now. Just because, I don't have player 2 controls set up. So I didn't want to put it in. That way we couldn't use it. But when we get 2-player controls set up, which is going to be fairly soon, then I will set up making the classes different, like one mutant, one mannequin, but still using the actual functional spawn points with a dynamic character class system. So anyway, to get started, we're going to make a few code changes and a few blueprint changes. So if you've been following the series, you should have your character class, which we're not going to touch anything with them today. We're going to add to the game mode class, but I did want to mention this right here. This variable right here, character class is just what I called it. That's basically the type of fighter you are. If you're the mannequin, the mutant, a ninja, whatever you are. This is what will end up being the data-driven variable that we will use to determine if we should spawn the mutant or the mannequin or whatever. This should be in the character because the character's class will be what determines how they spawn, right? That makes sense. If you're playing Smash Bros. Or Street Fighter, right, and you pick like Ryu or Mario, whatever, then you want to be able to transfer that data from the load screen or the character select screen to the game. So that's basically what this variable will do, and I'll show you how later. But I just wanted to show you this is the only thing in the character class I added. We're not even using it. That's why this is commented out. If you see two, I believe that's /. I always mix them up. But if you see 2 forward slashes or 2 backslashes, whatever it is, then you are going to, this is going to be a comment, which means it's not going to be read by the compiler. So basically, your comment will be there, so you can read it for whatever reason, but the compiler won't care about it. And I've talked about that before, but I wanted to bring it up again because that's why it's green and commented out right now. We're not using it. It'll be in the next episode with the character select screen. But I wanted to bring attention to that because people have been asking about transferring between a widget to in-game, and this is how we're going to do it. So if you want to make this variable and play around with it, that could be like an extra challenge for yourself or a good way to learn. Okay, so to get to the real stuff of what we did today to get to where we are, you should have a game mode class, and you'll have your base game mode from Unreal and all that, but from making your game mode, you will automatically have a derived one if you use the template, which mine is called Fighter Template Game Mode, because my project is Fighter Template. So whatever your project name is, game mode, just like your character, how mine's Fighter Template Character, you will have this Fighter Template Game Mode class. So you have the CPP in the header file. If you're familiar with the tutorial and you've been following the other episodes, then you'll notice that we've already added player 1 and player 2, which we're going to use as references to transfer things between levels. But I think more importantly, we're going to use it probably for 2-player controls, the way that I'm used to setting it up. So if you've already done that, then great. You don't have to do anything with that. But the most important part here for today is we need to make an enum to differ between the different character classes, as I am calling them. And again, character class in this sense, it could be anything. So it could be like rogue or fighter or brawler or, mage, whatever. But in a fighting game, the character class for me is just the different characters. I just call it the same thing because I'm used to calling them character classes in other games. So you see here, and again, this is something we've been over before in other episodes, but I'll go over it again. So we're making a enum, and I've done this specifically in the Super Smash Bros. Tutorial, which I'll link in the iCard in the top right in case you want to check that out. This enum is basically Unreal's version of an enumerator. So if you know enumeration, whether it be Blueprint or in code, it's the same thing really, but this is the way that you can get it easily from code to Blueprint, and Unreal will know what you're talking about. Because it doesn't there's a lot of times when Unreal will have issues with basic types. Like, Unreal doesn't like std string nearly as much as it likes f string and things like that, which makes sense because f string is Unreal's version of a string. So we're going to use their version. And you do this by making an enum class. So enum blueprint type just means you can use this enum in blueprints. And then when you do enum class, you can call it whatever you want. I can't remember if you have to put this E in front, but it is the standard. Like how it's F string. This is E for enum, so E character class. And then uint8 is just the type. You can pretty much always use uint8. I've never had to change it. That's just the type that these are going to be, these values right here. And then here, so this value right here, VE default, VE mutant. VE is the default for what you put as the preference to the name. So this isn't going to be what's displayed. This is the actual name of this value in the enum. So VE default is equal to 0. And if you're not familiar with how an enum works, then when you make an enum, you can assign values, or actually you can assign like names to values. It would be a better way to say it. What I mean by this is we just fill out this information. We make these variables, and they automatically go 0, 1. They're used to determine different types and things like that. So you don't need to make an integer or a boolean and be like, okay, so a good way to explain this would be if you have, say, in the fighting game, you have 8 characters. You don't want 8 booleans to be like, is character Ryu, is character Mario. You don't want to have to determine all that logic. Really, it's just ugly and takes a long time. If you make an enum and just set the class like, oh, VE Mario, well then you know that character is that player is playing as Mario. So you don't have to do a bunch of if checks and things like that. You can just do a switch on this enum, determine the exact value that we are, and then go from there. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So VE default is just the default character for me, which is the mannequin. And then the VE mutant is, of course, the mutant character. So this umeta display name equals mannequin and umeta display name equals mutant. All that's doing is that's setting the actual name you're going to see in Unreal. So I'll explain this in a second, but I want to show you what I mean. So when I'm switching on this, when I'm doing a switch statement on this character class enum, you see it's called mannequin and mutant. And that's because in the quotes here, I called them mannequin and mutant as the names of these enums. So if I make mannequin the option, then VE default is the one that's being used. If I change the option to mutant, then VE mutant is what is being used here. Does that make sense? So this is a value of 0, this is a value of 1, and here I'm determining which one we're going to use. Okay. Let's go back to this real quick. The last thing I want to say is make sure you don't forget these commas. If this is not the last entry in your list, you want to make sure you put a comma. So if I was going to add another one under this, which we can actually do right now, that's fine, like VE Ninja. And then I can just do, if I want to do umeta, display name equals ninja, then I would have to make sure I put a comma right here. Now I'm actually not going to do that right now because I'd have to do a rebuild and I don't want to waste the time to do it. So I'll comment that out and just keep that there. I think comments can work fine in enums. There are actually some things in Unreal, fun fact, that if you put a comment in it, Unreal will actually not like it because it doesn't understand, it's looking for like a symbol or like a certain character. And the comment might actually mess that up. I'm pretty sure enums don't care, so it should be fine. I'll just leave that there for now, and we'll do a regular build. Anyway, so we that doesn't really matter. We've already built, so it doesn't matter if that builds successfully or not with that comment. I was just kind of curious myself, and I wanted to figure it out while we were here. As you can see, I didn't change anything with the C++ itself, or with the CPP file. So don't worry about changing anything there. Just make this enum. That way we can use it in Blueprint. Okay, now we're going to switch over to the Blueprint side. There's not a ton going on here that you haven't already seen, but I do need to make some corrections, more like things that I left out last time because I didn't want to go too deep into this yet. So over here, I forget exactly what we did, but I know we spawned the character, set the player, and then I believe we did some other node after this. If we did, delete it. If we didn't, don't worry about it. Basically, what we were doing in the last episode was we were spawning a character class. So we were doing this. We were spawning a character, putting the class in of the character that we wanted to spawn, which makes sense, and then spawning them at the transform of the player start tag. Basically, spawn this class at the spawn point that they should spawn at, which makes sense, right? Like for this spawn point, if he was determined to be the mutant, then I want to spawn the mutant at this position. That makes perfect sense. That's the whole point of spawn points, right? But last time we were having an issue, and it wasn't really an issue. It was just, again, I didn't want to throw too much. I try not to throw too much at once to make it confusing as to why I did things. Basically, when you make a game mode, or when you use a template before you make a game mode, you will have a default set up. So if you go into a blueprint with your defaults, or if you go into blueprints, and then you can look at your game mode here, select game mode base class. We're already using the right one. The default game mode BP is one that I made. But my point of doing this is you can see your game mode here that you're using. If you're using a special base class, or excuse me, a special game mode, or a game mode that inherits off of the template game mode, which in Blueprint I believe is just, or excuse me, in Unreal I believe is just, yep. So if you're using the C++ template, you don't even get the Blueprint for the game mode. So this is the only class that you have. So you see this part right here where it sets the default pawn BP class. Well, this actually will end up spawning a extra character. So in the last episode, we had our 2 characters spawning, and I was actually controlling this random 3rd character in the back. He's not really random. What he was doing is we were using a default that was set up that we no longer want since we have different functionality. So if you're in your game mode BP blueprint, you can click on the button that says class defaults up here in the toolbar. You can go down to classes, go down to default pawn class, and so if you see it, it should look like side scroller character. If it's that, what's going to happen is you're going to get this 3rd character here because it spawns one by default and then looks for a spawn point to spawn at. So now you see we have 3 characters. Well, we don't want that in this case, but all you have to do is select it and go to none, so it doesn't spawn a pawn class by default. You could also remove it from the C++ class, which honestly is probably the better way to do it, but the reason I didn't do this is because there can actually be some crashes related to not having a character here if you don't put other characters in the level. So I find it just easier to just say none, and then when you're later on in your game when it's coming together and you don't have and everyone's filled out and you don't have like a bunch of characters that might not be fully ready yet, you can go ahead and remove this. That way you don't have those crashes and those errors. But for now, I would just go ahead and switch this to none. And then when you see compile save, you'll see that you take control of one of the only 2 players that exist, and there's not 3 players. Okay, so yeah, that's the thing from last episode that I wanted to go over and fix up, but I didn't want to get into that with the content of the last episode, so I felt here was a more fitting place to use it. Okay, and now I just made a function that spawns the class using the enum. So we're still using the spawn actor class like I told you we would in the last episode. So don't worry, we didn't get rid of that. The reason it looks different here is I made a new function called determine character class. I'd recommend this because if you put all your enum statements, all your switches on enums in one blueprint file, in like not putting them in functions and stuff, it's going to get really ugly really quickly, especially if you have a lot of characters. I plan on putting like 8 to 10 characters in max. If you plan on putting like 30 characters in, or some of the bigger games have as high as like 80 characters, well, you're going to have a switch statement with about 80 of these. You can do it other ways, and you probably would do it other ways if you had that many. But for now, I would make a function. It's a good practice anyway. And all you need to do is take the things that we need to feed to spawn actor. So you can copy your spawn actors, create a new function by pressing the little plus button right here. Call it whatever you want. I call it determine character class. And then I just added the transform in the inputs and the actor in the inputs. And then I have a fighter template character as a character reference. So this is just whatever your base character is. And you do that because if you don't do that, then you're going to basically not have any way to output this to player 1. And you could do it inside the function, but to me it didn't feel right with the name of the function. I always try to put things where the function names make sense. That way when I'm looking at the code, if I haven't looked at it in a while, or if someone else is looking at the code who never worked on it or wrote it, they'll still know what's being done in there. They can honestly make assumptions about what's being done in there, and they'll be correct because I'm not doing anything sneaky in there that they won't know about. So that's why I did it out here. Quick disclaimer, this get player controller index 0 and get player controller index 1, it's not the greatest way to do it, and we're going to fix it in the multiplayer episode. So don't worry if you're worried about that, or if it looks like it's not good. It's not good. But I have a way to fix it, and we're going to do it when we do the multiplayer episode. So I left the possess part out here for player 2 because I don't have a player index 1. I only have my keyboard plugged in. I don't have 2 player controllers. So if I go to do this, then you'll see I'll get an error just because I simply don't have it there. So that's why this is a bad way to do it. So I just went ahead and I kept the functionality because we're going to basically end up using this minus the get player controller nodes. But I wanted to give you a heads up. This is disconnected for a reason. If for whatever reason your inputs or outputs are saying please compile first, just make sure you do compile. Just listen to it. When you make a new function or an event and you go to add inputs or outputs, you need to compile first so that Unreal can generate that stuff for you to be able to add it in here. Okay, lastly, when we go inside of this function, and actually here, let me show you this. This is what my function looks like if you want to see the whole thing for spawn players. And if you want to see where spawn players is being called from, we went over this in the last episode, but I'll show you as well. That way you can mimic that if you get lost or if you have any trouble or just want to know how the way that I set it up right now. Lastly, we want to go to our determine character class, which is the new function we made, and do the most important part. And this is basically the switch that determines what character we want to spawn. So in the next episode, when we use this from a character select screen, we're actually going to have a variable for each player, player 1 and player 2. And it's going to basically just contain the enum value that is tied to this. So for example, if on the character select screen they choose the mutant, then we want this value. There'll be a enum plugged into this right here. If they choose the mutant, then the mutant's going to spawn. And then we'll have a separate one for player 2 again, so they can be different characters. But for now, you can still test the logic by just doing this. Go to the function, type switch on, and then it's the enum class that you made in code. Make sure, again, if you're new to code, make sure you rebuild or at least build the solution and then compile UE4 if necessary. You can go on the main menu and hit compile. That way your code changes get uploaded to Blueprint and the editor can see them. If you don't see them, you probably didn't compile, or you probably didn't build in Visual Studio, or have errors, or you probably didn't compile on UE4 and it didn't hot reload. Hot reload just means that as soon as it built in Visual Studio, it let the editor know that it built, and then you have your changes there without having to compile. It never hurts to compile again, though. Okay. So just do switch on the enum class that we made in code. So for me, that is eCharacter class. Should be pretty much the only thing there. You can select it, and then you'll have your options that you made. So I have mannequin and mutant. Soon we'll have ninja and a bunch of others. And then you can do branching logic. So in this case, if it's the mannequin, go ahead and spawn. The side scroller character is just the mannequin because he's just the default fighter template character. So if it's the mannequin, spawn the mannequin. If it's the mutant, spawn the mutant. Then you can go ahead and just return this. So I return the object reference of that character into my player. Basically saying player 1 is this mutant class. Player 2 is this mannequin class reference. And there you go. In the next episode, I'll give you a quick sneak peek of what we're going to be doing. So if we go into here, you can see, my bad, you can see that I'm working on a character select screen. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have boxes to pick from, different characters, and then we're going to work on getting animations in, or at least pictures for now, when you select one. That way it looks flashy, like if you, in Street Fighter, if you select Ryu, he like comes up into the screen, grinning, and he flexes his muscles real tough. That's what this is. So this is what we'll be doing in the next episode. If you're interested, come check it out. If this helped you, or you do want to see that next episode, then please subscribe because it'll give you notifications when I put out a new video. And if you need any more help, feel free to comment down below, or you can feel free to join the Discord as well. It's always open. There's a link in the description. If you join the Discord, I'll be able to help you with pictures and videos of the code and blueprints, which is a lot more helpful than just the text, but I'm fine if you just want to comment on it as well. Anyway, guys, I think that's it for today. I'm Shawnthebro, and we will be doing we'll be doing the third-person template video next weekend. So I'll see you in the next one, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. Have a nice night.